Vulnerability is a choice, I think, to be true in how you express yourself, however weak and unput together that is. And it's taking a risk that you'll be hurt and rejected. But it's also the only way to connect with other people. And it's the only way to be known, and it's often the only way to allow the other person to be vulnerable.
Welcome to the Earth Keepers podcast. This podcast is for people who seek new and better ways to love and care for the earth. It's a podcast for anyone who is deeply concerned about the harm being done to the environment on a local and global level. It's a podcast that builds community and connection between people of like heart and mind, people who believe that earth care should be integrated into every aspect of life, and for many in the Earth Keepers community, that includes our spiritual lives. In this episode, I'll be joined by my occasional co-host, Sine. We'll be talking to Jo Swinney, Director of Communications for A Rocha International, a global family of conservation organizations working together to care for creation and to equip others to do likewise. Specifically, we'll be talking about a new book that Jo co-authored with her mother, Miranda Harris. The book, which we highly recommend, is called A Place at the Table: Faith, Hope, and Hospitality. In that book, Jo draws from lessons learned from being part of a family that has always practiced hospitality that also creates community among conservation-minded people from all over the world. In this episode, she shares her practical wisdom from experience regarding what it takes to show true hospitality, including the courage to practice vulnerability with those we invite into our spaces. Welcome, friends, to the Earth Keepers podcast. Well, welcome, friends, to the podcast. I am pleased to introduce two people today. First, my guest co-host, Sine, curator of the blog Godspace, author of The Gift of Wonder and other books, and co-founder of Circlewood, the parent organization for this podcast. So welcome, Christine.
Forrest, it's wonderful to be with you again. I'm delighted to be a part of this podcast.
Our guest today is Jo Swinney, head of communications for the environmental group A Rocha International, and co-author of the book A Place at the Table: Faith, Hope, and Hospitality. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you. It's really great to be here.
Jo, before we talk about your new book, A Place at the Table, would you tell us a bit about your life context, where you live, your family, what you're invested in these days?
I live in the city of Bath in the UK. It's a national heritage site. It's a beautiful city where Jane Austen set most of her novels. And I live here with my husband, Sean, who is a vicar in the Church of England, and our two daughters, Alexa and Caris, who are 16 and 13. What I'm invested in is lots of rich friendships and cooking for people, reading, walking, travelling, working, my church. Yeah.
Well, Jo, I first met your parents, I think in the mid-90s. I was trying to remember exactly where it was, but I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember that they had a huge impact on my life, even back then. And I think I signed up for whatever communication they were getting. And then as A Rocha continued to expand, I followed that story with great interest and great delight. And so it's really a delight to be able to talk to you both about your book, A Place at the Table, and also about A Rocha. So can you tell us a bit more about A Rocha, how it came to be, the work it does, and how it figures in your book?
Yeah, so my parents founded A Rocha 40 years ago this year. So 1983, the context was of the church really not understanding that the environment had anything to do with Christian faith at all. But my dad was an avid bird watcher, and he also loved the Bible, and he saw that within Scripture was clear evidence that God loves and cares for all he's made, not just the human part. So along with another family, we moved to the Algarve, which is southern Portugal, and an area of really key significance, particularly for birds, because they're on a migration route from Africa to Europe each year. And most of the Algarve is now covered in golf courses and hotels and marinas. And the very last bit really to be protected is because of A Rocha. So we lived there as a family for 12 years, and that was how A Rocha got started. And over that time, lots and lots of people came through to stay, to work, to live with our family, and took those experiences back to where they lived and wanted to start similar endeavours where they were. So we are now in 20 countries on 6 continents. There's a very, very long list out the door and around the corner for people wanting to start A Rochas where they are, because I think there's been a real sea change and people now understand, partly because things have got a lot worse, unfortunately, but we do now understand that this is something the church does need to be involved with. I find myself working for A Rocha, having grown up in it, which is a bit of a plot twist for me, and telling the story again, having grown up trying to explain to my little friends what on earth my parents did. Here I am again.
So, by way of introducing the book, I wonder if we could begin with the passage close to the end of the book. And on page 175, you wrote about your mother. She taught me to lead with the heart, to find space for one more person if at all possible, to put food in pretty pottery dishes even though it would mean more washing up, to receive God's good gifts with joy, pleasure, and deep gratitude that they deserve. In short, she taught me everything I know about hospitality and much of what I love about Jesus. I miss her and I can't wait to see her again. Could you unpack that passage for us and maybe even talk about how the book came about?
Yeah, I will need to address the fact that I'm talking about her in the past tense, and the book came about after she had died in a car accident in October 2019. And her and my dad and the chief exec of A Rocha and his wife were in South Africa with A Rocha, and there was a road accident in which my mum was killed. And following that, my dad needed to move because the house was very painful for him and too big. So when we were clearing out, we started coming across lots and lots of my mum's writing. She was a great letter writer and an archivist. So she had binders full of really well-kept letters, newsletters, articles, things like that. But there was also a folder with notes for a book. And she talked about writing a book for a really long time, to the point where I kind of tuned her out when she started talking about it, because I was kind of just assuming that it was all talk, if I'm honest. But finding that she'd made a start gave me the impetus to take it over the line and to do what I could to get her in print. I knew that she wanted to talk about hospitality and community, and that was her great contribution to the work of A Rocha. And she had both given and received hospitality in a great number of contexts around the world. So that was the germ of the book. That was where it all started. Not the book that she knew she was going to write, but it's what we have.
Well, I was enthralled by the excerpts that you used of your mother's journal and the way that you wove them into the narrative. In fact, I found myself in tears at certain points just reading those, and I can imagine that it was both a delight and a challenge for you to read through those journals and articles and things like that. And I was wondering, what new insights did you learn from your mother as you'd read through those journals? And how has the experience of engaging with those journals shaped your memories of her?
Well, firstly, yes, it was, I think, more of a painful than enjoyable experience, partly because most of her writing was handwriting, which is very immediate. And I had been away at school and she'd written me letters. So it was quite confusing to read these letters and see her handwriting, but have to face the fact she wasn't going to write me more letters. At the same time, it was like an additional time in her company, and I did learn some new things about her. We had a bit of a family story. You know how you get these settled versions of events that you kind of all agree to, and one of those was that Mum's primary time investment was in us as children when we were little, and that Dad was the one kind of leading the charge, setting up the organisation. And reading her journals from that time, she was absolutely up there in terms of effort and output and the pioneering spirit of that woman. Goodness me, she was so brave and she gave everything of herself at that time, as well as to us, to that fledgling organisation. So I realised that about her. I also realised I knew she was funny, but she made me laugh a lot in her descriptions of things, and just kind of quite self-depreciating and observant about herself and other people around her. And she did have a tendency to polish up memories and make them all sparkling and shiny. And she was obviously more honest about the ups and downs in the immediate present when she was recounting things to herself. So I realised a bit more bluntly the cost of some of those early experiences. Some of the loneliness, some of the hardships may be too strong, because it wasn't like they were in somewhere without electricity or with enormous flesh-eating bugs or anything, but it wasn't exactly easy. You couldn't get the roof to stop dripping in the winter and all our clothes went mouldy. I do remember that, but as a child it didn't bother me, I think, in the way that it would if I was an adult. Things like that obviously got her down, and painting a picture from further ahead, she always gave it a bit of a buff, so it seemed very exciting and not too difficult. So I learnt those things. Yeah, it's just filled out some perspectives. I think I had my own childlike eyes on what was going on, and I learnt what it was like to be the grown-up in those situations.
Speaking of childhood perspective, I actually know you from over 25 years ago when I had the great privilege of being with your family. I took a course from your dad and your mom at Regent College. It was the last course in my theology degree, and it was definitely the best course. I would say that it transformed my perspective of the environment of creation care in really powerful ways. In fact, it was quite freeing, because I'd grown up in a context that kind of downplayed the value of creation and really excluded creation from God's work of salvation and redemption in many ways. So it was a very powerful course for me, and actually for my friends as well. I think equally powerful, though, was being exposed to your family. I remember the weekend that we all spent on Galiano Island, where you were living at the time. And I think the whole weekend, I just was hyper aware. I just had a sense that there is something here for you. Pay attention. And I think it had a lot to do with hospitality, actually, with the way that your parents, especially your mother, was able to draw people into a temporary community that was nevertheless quite deep and powerful. I would even say transformative as well. I felt loved, accepted, heard, and I would say your whole family was part of that somehow. I was really looking at the dynamics between you and how open-boundaried the family was in terms of receiving people who would otherwise be strangers. So I appreciate very much both of those influences, the influence on my theology, but also on my practice of hospitality, because it's since that time became very, very important to me in terms of my calling. So I'm wondering about A Rocha generally. All the people I know in the A Rocha sphere, sure, they talk about A Rocha as a place where people who care about ecology and nature come together to experience community. But it seems like it's way more than that. That in fact, it's about personal transformation almost as much as it is about science and ecology and birding. What has your experience of that dynamic been growing up? That whole idea of community that transforms and heals and changes people who become a part of it.
Yeah, I remember that weekend really well. We had just as a family left Portugal, and I know I wouldn't say that grief is too small a word for what I was feeling about that, but there was something very special about your class, I have to say. They taught many classes at Regent. There was something about you guys, and for me, that weekend, the few weeks that we spent in and out of your lives as a class showed me that what we'd lost in leaving Portugal could be found in other places and around other people. So it was a healing thing to be with you guys on Galiano and in Vancouver and in various places. I think God made us to be changed by each other, not in isolation, not in esoteric abstract encounters with the Holy Spirit, but in the nitty-gritty of life and in being up close with other people who can really hurt us often. And I think it's in that being known, forgiving, doing things together that you would have otherwise done alone, finding you're not the only one to care passionately about something and sharing that burden. those things do change us. That's the intention of it, I know. I would say that there were times that the constant coming and going was difficult for us, and the open boundaried nature of our family, while it was a decision that we had all signed up to, it could also leave us a little bit far flung out from a sense of our family identity in a tighter sense. I don't regret any of that, but it has shaped a bit how I've chosen to parent. I'm still working through some of the memories and some of the ways we did that and the impacts that's had on me now as a grown-up. Yeah, like a lot of things, not simple, a lot of beauty, quite a bit damage in there too. That's not irreparable.
Yeah, I have to say that for my daughter, I often thought about your family as I was raising her and making choices whether to, for example, keep her at home when I was teaching a course or bring her with me and let her meet the students and interact with them, or opening my home to classes and courses that I was teaching. And I think based on that beautifully open dynamic I saw in your family, it was my decision to actually open my small family in the same way. And sure, I'm sure that Kyra will eventually have to process things, but I think on the whole, she's become such a better person because of it. She's just more open-hearted and less fearful than she might have been. So I just appreciate, again, that example that you all showed to me.
Yeah, we just do our best, don't we, as parents? And I agree with you on the whole. It's so much better to open ourselves and our families up. And so many people need a family to hoard away our own connections with each other in isolation from the people that are lonely, and that it doesn't sit right with me at all.
Well, Forrest, we certainly appreciated you bringing Kyra with you when you came to visit. And one of the things that I love is a piece of artwork that she gave us is usually displayed in our living room. And I don't know what impact it had on Kyra, but it certainly had a very positive impact on us. You're bringing her with you. I know that's kind of a little aside, but, you know, it is a form of hospitality. I think that people provide hospitality by bringing their kids with them sometimes, as well as having people come and stay with them.
Children are very intuitive as well and make their connections with people quite discerningly. And I think that can be a real gift to have intergenerational connections. And we as children, we always expected people to take us seriously and to form friendships with us on our own account and not just as part of the Harris entourage. We would beeline people and really connect on our own basis.
That's lovely.
I remember hanging out with your brother, Jem, and it was so fun. He was teaching me so much, right? And the more I said, wow, I didn't know that, the more he would tell me. So, like, he taught me how to feed hummingbirds by hand. It was amazing. And he was teaching me a little bit about the beach ecology on Galiano Island as well. Yeah, that openness, that confidence, that boldness was really such a joy to experience. It was so fun. Yeah.
That reminds me of a family. We live in a small intentional community, and I always love it when we have a family as part of that community. And one of the families, the little 5-year-old girl, just loved helping me in the garden. And when I would do garden seminars, she would be there teaching alongside me. You know, she always had things to add to what I was sharing. And it was so delightful to have that input. And the people that attended just absolutely loved it as well. It was beautiful. Anyway, I just wanted to say I appreciated in the book your honesty about some of the mistakes that you made and the struggles that you went through to do hospitality properly, because I have friends who will not do hospitality unless everything can be absolutely and utterly perfect, and how much they miss because of that. So I was struck by your comment, who was all this effort for? And the recognition that wanting it perfect was more for you than it was for the people that you were entertaining. And as you point out, even our hospitality towards others can sometimes be self-serving. So how has your view of hospitality changed over time? And what would you say today are the greatest rewards of a hospitality-focused life. I mean, we've already talked about the reward of having that intergenerational interaction, but there must be other things as well.
I think the word hospitality has become unhelpfully conflated with entertaining. And so one of the things I've learned is that, well, entertaining is a nice hobby and I really enjoy it sometimes, receiving and giving it. It's not the same thing as hospitality. And the other thing I've learned is that I don't have to be, in fact, I mustn't be hospitable in the manner of my mother. What was killing me, I think, was trying to meet what I had in my head as her standards. And it's just not my style. I'm not tidy. I'm not someone who knows how to, or will even think to polish the wood in the front hall so it smells clean when people walk in. But I'm juggling a lot more than she did, if I'm honest. And she had the time and the inclination to give to the really fine details. And those things were wonderful, but I've released myself from them. And I found that my low standards are often really quite encouraging to people. So I also have learned what you said about who is it for, to try and think ahead of time about the person or people who are coming, about where they're at in their life, about what the situation is they're coming from and what they most are going to need to feel cared for. And sometimes that is going to be a really complicated, hearty, locally sourced meal. And I do enjoy cooking. But other times it will be to not be fussed by anything and to come and find a corner of our home and curl up and be left alone. And so I've tried to just take it as it comes and be flexible. I've also had to adapt because my husband's theory of hospitality is very different to mine. And he loves nothing better than going into someone's house and being able to forage and sort himself out. And he thinks that's the greatest thing you can do for another person, is just leave them alone to get on with it. So he will sort of show people into our kitchen and say, there's the fridge, that's where the tea is, be at home. And yeah, we've kind of tried to reach a middle ground. But I think what I'd say is it is really at its heart, it's about the other person. It's about a space for them to be made safe. And like you said, Forrest, seen and appreciated, respected, and that they have a place at the table. Even if the table is full of piles of books and papers and crumbs from toast at breakfast.
Well, you really make such a thought-provoking point about the connection between hospitality and vulnerability. I wonder if you could read for us the last paragraph on page 144, and then just talk about how vulnerability has looked like in your own practices of hospitality.
Yes, so it says, if you are holding back from setting a large table and flinging open your front door because you are afraid of exposing your less than perfect inner state, you're not the only one. Since Adam and Eve tried to cover themselves with fig leaves, the human instinct is to hide away in shame. Push through the fear, step into the light, and you will find that God, who sees all, is not shocked or dismayed by the state of you, and he's at your right hand, your co-host. So, vulnerability is a choice, I think, to be true in how you express yourself, however weak and unput together that is. And it's taking a risk that you'll be hurt and rejected. But it's also the only way to connect with other people. And it's the only way to be known. And it's often the only way to allow the other person to be vulnerable. So it's a choice that I've made. And it means for me continuing to meet up with people when my mental health isn't great. It means when I've worked all day and the dinner's not ready, it means saying to myself and my guests, it's okay if I cook while they're there, and if they want to help, yes please. Sometimes it means saying, please can you leave by 9:30 because I'm absolutely exhausted, but until then I will be my brightest and best self with you. Stay a moment after that and I'm crashed out. So yes, I don't know, I'm still finding my way to doing it, and I don't honestly always find it easy. We are part of a church. Our church is right opposite our house. I know people wish they could drop in on us whenever they liked. And for various reasons, we kind of sent out a clear message that we weren't a dropping in kind of vicarage. And to be a disappointment to a community is really hard for me, but those boundaries were important. They felt important for our girls to have a sense of their home being their home. They weren't going to have people sprung on them and have to drop their homework and make tea for the people of the parish. Also for me having a job, I work from home and I couldn't constantly be stopping to be the church mum as much as I might enjoy that. But also we do invite people in quite a bit, but I don't know. I don't find it that easy still, I have to say, working it out how many people to have flow in and out of the house.
Well, I'm with you. I mean, when you talked about your husband saying, there's the tea, help yourself, I kind of cringed. It's like, wait, you let them into the sanctuary, right? Without instructions. And honestly, when I was working in Turkey with a new church, my home, for better or for worse, was oftentimes where the church met, just because of different political constraints. And it was hard for me to give up control, to let people see all parts of the house. There were times when they would come in with wet socks and they'd just walk into my room and look for the socks and find a new pair of socks to wear. Or I had friends who would taste the soup I had made for the day and shake their heads and start salting it. So I know you're cringing as well, but that's part of family life. It's part of living together. And in so many ways, we had to live together in that sort of intimate connection. So it continues to be a challenge for me. But I will say that one of my inspirations for vulnerable hospitality is actually Christine and her husband, Tom. Yeah, their hospitality is, I think, quite vulnerable. I'm not sure you experience it like that, Christine, but for much of the time, the dog will be under the table loudly chewing on a bone. Or kids who live on the upper floor will be parading in and out of the meeting space. And so there's a bit of reality, of authenticity that took a while to get used to, but I learned so much. I continue to learn from Christine and her husband, Tom. I mean, Christine, how did you receive that passage?
Well, I think as I read the book, I was thinking of some of our own experiences of doing hospitality and my own experience of experiencing hospitality. And of course, like you, Jo, I am not a neat person. And having the dog around the place, even though I sometimes thought, other people maybe don't appreciate this quite as much, was just part of what it was. And I think I just kind of accepted that. And early on, probably because of some of the experiences I had of hospitality, I lived with a family in New Zealand way back when I was in general practice there in the 70s. And they were some of the most hospitable people I have ever known. And the woman would be in town and she'd meet a tourist and she'd invite them home for dinner. And so we were always having to make do and learned as a result of that just to relax into whatever happened and take the comical and the challenging parts as well as the delightful parts of hospitality, I think. So that's probably what you've seen Tom and I do here, Forrest, because we love doing hospitality, but it's never anywhere close to perfect.
Well, let me ask another question, take a different angle on hospitality. And I will say that throughout the book, you make it clear that hospitality has everything to do with environmental justice and even social justice. I wonder if you could describe for us how you see those connections and maybe also answer the question, does it change the way that we think about the practice of hospitality, the way we do it?
Could I read a small section of the book that addresses this, and then we can talk a bit more about it? Farmers produce enough food to feed the world, yet just under 700 million go to bed hungry every night, largely owing to poverty, conflict, and localised impacts of climate change. If we continue to overconsume and use production methods that deplete nutrients in the soil, pollute the water, and eradicate the pollinators, hunger will eventually be an acute problem for all of us. Just a side note, in Ghana, I've just been to visit A Rocha's work in Ghana. They haven't got enough bees to pollinate now, so they have people who are employed to pollinate plants, which Anyway, absolute madness. As a member of a generally very well-fed society, do I have anything to do with those starving in faraway lands? And if I do, how could I possibly make a difference when the need is so acute? I don't think there's any way of wriggling out of our individual and corporate responsibility for the suffering of others, whether they're around the corner or on a different continent. God's passionate concern for those in need is writ large throughout the Bible, and his primary means of helping them is us, his hands and feet on earth. Hungry people are our problem. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded, said Jesus in Luke 12:48. This could all become rather crushing if it wasn't for the fact that God knows better than anyone that no single person can make a dent in a problem as massive as world hunger. But each of us can make some choices: to acknowledge, not ignore those who go hungry, to share our resources with the greatest possible impact, to make steps towards a more sustainable diet, reducing our meat consumption and food waste, for example, and to add our voices to others calling for just and wise policies around food production, distribution and sale, until all our voices together make a noise loud enough to demand attention. So yes, food is the most immediate and frequent way that our lives hit environmental issues and justice issues, I would say.
Well, I was thinking, Jo, in line with that, I love the way that you structure the book based on the progression of a meal. But you don't start with preparing the meal, you start it with hunger. And I think that what you were just saying is so much in keeping with that, because if we realize that a good meal starts with hunger, I think it can totally change the way that we look at those who are hungry in the world as well. And then you end with the banquet feast of God in the new heaven and the new earth, which is just such beautiful imagery for me. And I think for Tom and I has been something that has undergirded our delight in doing hospitality. So I loved this. So can you tell us a bit about the progression in the book and why you did it the way that you did?
So some of it was, I've never actually made a quilt, but this is how I imagine someone would make a quilt. That you have lots of scraps of fabric and maybe then you lay them all out on the floor and you play around with them and you look for the patterns. So this is how I started with my mum's material, and I ended up thinking that would be the best way of stitching together something coherent, was to follow a meal. I also wanted to explore some wide themes while staying really connected to the very simple face value understanding of food and eating together and clearing up, because I believe in my bones that God takes those things seriously too. And as Christians, we can sometimes go on a big swoop around thinking we're being really spiritual by playing with ideas and disconnected thoughts. So that was how I was disciplining myself to stay exploring the actual nitty-gritty of chopping up carrots and cooking them and what you say to the person next to you while you're eating, that kind of thing. That's why I structured it around a meal. And where it ended was because since losing my mum, I have just really been thinking a lot about heaven and drawn to all the metaphors and the hints and pictures of what it will be like, because I do really miss her. And I'm really comforted by the solidity of what seems to be on offer and the joy of it and the richness of it. And how much food there's going to be.
Oh, there is. And how much chaos too. I have two images in my mind of the hospitality of God in the new heaven and the new earth. One of them, I saw a painting years ago that was basically of a banquet table that was set totally formally with, I don't know how many settings to it, and not a single person at the table. And the other one was done by a Filipino artist of this chaotic feast. And I thought, I am really drawn to that chaotic feast imagery, because I think that that's more of what it's likely to be like in the kingdom of God. So on that line, Jo, what are your hopes for the people who read this book? How are you hoping they will be impacted by it?
So I've already heard a couple of people say that as a result of reading the book, they have met up with somebody, or they've started a little dinner club where somebody brings potatoes and somebody brings some grated cheese or something. This was a little group of students that I heard of. My hope is that it makes its way from the pages and actually becomes something that people can say is why they're living a different way. Maybe that's a grand hope, isn't it? But I really would love some of the intimidation to come out of it, because I actually think being hospitable is for all of us, and it's going to look very, very different. But I think if we're going to live wholehearted lives, they're going to be hospitable lives one way or another.
We've been in conversation with Jo Swinney about her new book, A Place at the Table, Faith, Hope, and Hospitality, co-authored with Miranda Harris. For more information about this book and to learn about Jo's work with A Rocha, go to this episode's show notes. I'm Forrest Inslee, your podcast host. Our executive producer is James Amadon. Our producer is Dave Wolfers. Forrest Reed is the creator of our original music, and Timothy Connor is our podcast editor. Our research assistant is Alex Megerly, and Jessalyn Gentry is our social media director. Thank you, friends, for listening, and please join us for our next conversation on the Earthkeepers podcast.